Hello and welcome to Wintergrace Senior Ministries. I'm Debbie Bergio. I am joined today by Rachel Jenkins, owner of Scrap My Pix. Family photos are one of my most favorite treasures, and that is what we get to talk about today. Rachel, welcome and thank you.
Thank you for having me. I knew we had an automatic connection when you started talking about family history.
Absolutely. Tell me, how did you come to your business and how did we get to Scrap My Pix in 2021?
Yeah, so I was a big scrapbooker, hence the name Scrap My Pix. And I was with a bunch of my girlfriends and we would spend time getting together and we would work on our own books. And there was one day I was with them and I said, man, I just wish somebody would pay me to do this. And they were all like, well, people probably would. And that's kind of how it was born. And what I quickly realized is that most people weren't organized enough, or they felt overwhelmed by the burden of the number of photos that they had. And, how do I make all of that happen? So even to be able to hand over some photographs, to me to put together into a book, it was hard for them because they just didn't have things organized, and they would go down a path of overwhelm. So it quickly materialized into me helping them get their photos organized, help them pick the best of the best. I also quickly realized that doing traditional scrapbooks for others can be kind of expensive. I mean, it's very time consuming. Those traditional books are very time consuming. So the business has evolved a lot, from the organizing the photos to helping them get them digitized in a quality way, and then designing books. But we're doing bound books now where we design them digitally and then we produce a bound book, kind of like the ones you see behind me there, versus the traditional book. So it's not really scrapbooking, but I still like the name and it's been with me a long time. And so here I am in 2021 and still loving what I do.
I think it's scrapbooking. It is scrapbooking of 2021. It truly is.
Yeah, it still is. It's a little different, but
Yeah.
it's definitely still different than what I do, even just with my own personal. I still do some traditional scrapbooking, at home for my own family, and I feel like I'm so slow at it these days. It's kind of ironic that I'm like, I need to speed up. It's, the carpenter's daughter, right? Our house was never finished. My dad was a carpenter and our house was never really finished.
That seems to be the way. I know I just finished a project. Well, I'm in the midst of a project. I've done the scanning part of about 4,000 photos from my parents' house that we just.
Wow.
And now the next step is I sorted out the pictures, who goes to my sister, what goes to my brother, what's all of us, and now I'm trying to name them digitally.
All right.
And organize them. So I'm right in the midst of what you do.
Okay.
So when someone calls you and says, oh, I have 3,000 photos from the last, some of them are over 100 years old. What do I do? What's that process like working with you?
Well, the first thing I'll say is most people don't know how many photos they actually have. I think that they might think they only have 3,000.
Oh, that's just a chunk. Those 3,000 are just a chunk.
Yeah. So like you probably have a pretty good handle on what you've got there because you've been doing the scanning too. But I think a lot of times people just don't really understand the volume that they have. So that's really kind of the first step is, showing me what you've got. Right now in COVID days, we can do a Zoom call like you and I are doing, and people can show me their bins so I can kind of get a little bit of better sense of what they've got. So those initial conversations really are, what's your dream of what the end looks like of your photo collection? Are you trying to downsize? Are you trying to get organized? Are you, trying to prepare a collection, legacy collection for your family and your siblings to share? So really understanding what their ultimate goal is probably the first step in that conversation, because I might put a different plan together depending on what your answer is.
Right.
Yeah.
Trying to focus on that, help people focus their goal is a huge help.
Yeah. Yeah. Like if they're moving, and all of a sudden all those bins are now coming out of the closets and they don't know what to do with them, and the feeling of overwhelm washes over a lot of people when they start pulling
Sure.
those things out from under the beds and out of the closets. And, you know, so taking that first step sometimes, you know, sometimes it's just people want to just drop it off and say, you do it. But I still need to know, what do you want it to look like? You know, what's your, you know, who's the audience for these photos? Because that's going to play a large role in, you know, how we put things together for them, whether it's a book or it's, you know, we just placing them in archival storage, but we're scanning things.
So we choose a project, we have a lot of pictures, and then you just mentioned scanning and archival. So these are a couple of different ways to go.
Yeah. So once we get the collection here and we get things organized, sometimes they'll arrive to us and they're already organized. Oftentimes they're not. And it's amazing what we can do from an organization standpoint, even if we're not working directly with you. There are a lot of tools in our tool bag that we use to, you know, bring those collections together and give them some order. And so we'll put some order to it, and we establish the parameters with our clients on what they want to have scanned, because we don't necessarily recommend that you scan everything, because then you're just trading one volume of photos for another volume of photos that you still might not know what to do with. So we try to establish some parameters on what do you want to have scanned. You know, the 20 sunset pictures that you took while you were in Hawaii might mean something to you, but they might not mean something to your children because they weren't there. They have their own they have their own sunset pictures that they've got to deal with. So we'll establish those parameters. We'll get things scanned, and then, you know, ultimately we're going to take those, the printed materials, and we will move those into archival boxes. Sometimes we move them into archival binders, where it's like a 3-ring binder, and you can still, and the photos go into, you know, slotted pages, and you can still look through those binders and actually look at your printed photos without getting your fingerprints all over them, and they are protected in archival materials. So depending, again, you know, how you want to be able to use your collection is how we will set things up from an archival standpoint and from a long-term storage standpoint. You know, we're ultimately, you know, all of us, you know, I know for myself, I think about my kids and are they going to want to inherit my collection of 60,000 digital photos that I have? Right. So, you know, coming up with a way to curate that and establish a best of the best, so that that's really all they're getting and that's all they're going to want. They're already going to get all my scrapbooks.
Absolutely.
I had a mini panic attack on that. I got to say, in this last year, I was thinking to myself, what am I doing creating all these scrapbooks? And, you know, I have 2 boys. So my initial gut is like, they're not going to want these. And one side of my brain was saying, yeah, but this is your outlet, Rachel. This is how you spend your time doing this and you enjoy it. And once COVID's over, you can get back together with your girlfriends and do it. And the camaraderie around, you know, around that activity is really important. But I was like, maybe I need to move everything to digital, create my books digitally and do the printed books like that. And then my boys both have birthdays in February, and my youngest, who just turned 13, he's really adamant about every birthday he pulls out his baby books. And we sit on the bed at night and we look through his baby books, even at 13, and he'd kill me if he knew that this was going to be out there in the world. But you know, it reminded me how important those books are. Absolutely. And my oldest said to me, because I was having this conversation with him, and I said, you know, are you guys going to even want these books? And he's like, don't worry, Mom, we'll take your books. And I was like,
yeah, that actually gives me goosebumps.
I know, kind of makes me almost tear up. Yeah. But it was just very reassuring that what I was doing was time well spent.
That's such a treasure. Yeah. I imagine one of the types of projects that you do is like a life perspective. You might have a client who has pictures and in memorabilia throughout their whole life, and you can put that together in a legacy album.
Yes, yes. And we love those kind of projects. I love taking the written word of someone and taking their photo collection and marrying those two pieces together into something beautiful that they can hand off to someone. We had a client a few years ago that came to me. He was a member of the clergy in a church in Arlington in the 70s. And he had a youth group there that he was very excited to keep those stories alive, because it meant a lot to him. And he, over the years, stayed in contact with many of those youth group members. Wow. And I think to this day, he had been in touch with them. So he brought us all of his old scrapbooks from the church. And they were kind of falling apart and things were falling out of them and the paper gets kind of crumbly. And he's like, I want to do something with this, but I'm not sure what. And I think initially he just wanted to have them digitized and kind of maybe put back into a book, but like almost like the same exact book recreated, but in a bound book. But the more we talked, the more I realized that he had more of a story to tell. And so when I asked him, I said, are you still in contact with these youth group members? And he's like, well, yeah. And I said, well, why don't we digitize the photos? You tell your story, and then we have the youth group members write a paragraph or two about what the youth group meant to them, and we include that in the book. So that's what we ended up doing. So let me just kind of get back here. It actually has an index, almost like a real book. And so he wrote all of this copy. And we scanned all of these photos, and then where you see this writing in kind of a different color tone, this was the writing of a youth group member. So we have that kind of sprinkled throughout. So, pictures of these folks and newspaper articles and, stuff that they did, and went to Shrinemont. Some people wrote more than a paragraph. So, but I don't know, sorry.
What an absolute treasure.
Yeah. And so there were many copies of this book that went out, and I think pretty much every one of the youth group members got a copy of that book.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
And just we read biographies, we hear about famous people and their biographies, but we all, as individuals, we all have stories to tell.
Absolutely.
And for you to be able to put that together in a beautiful package to retell that story, what a gift.
Yeah. Yeah. And, he clearly touched a lot of people. He's recently passed away, and I know that book will mean a lot to the folks that he impacted over the years. So
absolutely. You have a couple other books there that I would love for you to share.
Okay.
Just gives everyone an idea of different possibilities. So
there's many different types of books that we can do. There's the family history, and that one was, more of a church history, but there's the family history. There's a book of, a travel vacation. You went to Bali and, you want to have a book of your travel images. We can do those. This one was more of a lifetime of travel. So this couple traveled the world multiple times and went to very interesting places. And she was a film photographer and not a technically trained photographer, but she had an amazing gift for connecting with people. And most all of her photos, most all of them, you can see it in the eyes that she was connecting with them. And she went into some pretty remote and sometimes dangerous places. Wow. She even told me that at one point she is a blonde, and she had one of the tribes wanted some of her hair. So I get to work with these people that tell these amazing stories, and I can live vicariously through them.
That's great.
Yeah. So, this is just a sample. And like in this case, we really wanted to highlight the photos, and it was really about the photos. And so the design in something like this is very simple. So this is the laundry in India. And again, this is another book that she's actually sold copies of this book, and there's been multiple copies of this book out there. So, so there's a few landscape type photos in here, but most of hers are connecting with the people.
Okay.
And I love her cover on this one. So that's the front, and then this is the back, and that's the same woman.
Wow.
And that's all beading, which is amazing.
My goodness.
So, and then the other book here was, this was a book of travel across 18 years. This client came to me with, it was amazing. She curated down 18 years of travel with her family into one book. So this book probably has close to 600 photos in it.
Oh, wow. Okay.
But each of the trips, she was able to get down to, a smaller number of photos. So some pages are more, but
good for her that she's able to narrow it down. I have a hard time putting, unless it's a really awful picture, I have a hard time putting things.
And I think for her, probably the further away you get from it, the easier it is to curate out, right? So I think the older the trip was, you can probably go through those, plus the older the trip was, we may have only had a couple of rolls of film, where now in our digital world, we're taking 1,000 photos on a week vacation, right?
That's true.
Some people just take a ton of photos, myself included. No judgment. But you got to be able to curate through it. So, those older trips where you probably took 4 or 5 rolls of film, it's easier now to curate through there and decide what the important photos are. So fewer really is better.
That's great. One thing I want to ask you about, we talked about this on the phone when we talked about you've changed how you do your scanning and your techniques. And I was wondering if you could just briefly share that, and why did you do that?
Yeah, so through this past year kind of makes my memory of years go weird, but not this past fall of 2020, but the fall of 2019, we actually stopped using scanners. And I had started to roll in doing what they call camera scanning. And so basically it's a camera that's mounted on kind of a tripod. It's not really a tripod, but it's mounted on a stand, and then there's a flat surface. So the image lays on the flat surface and the camera is above it. Okay. And if you're familiar with macro photography, you're doing it's kind of like close-up macro photography. So the camera is very still, and it's focused on the image or on the negative or on the slide, and that's how we capture our images today. We started out using camera scanning just for slides, and started doing some negative work as well that way. And we were just getting much higher quality images than using a traditional scanner. And I was using a good scanner, but the camera, using a pro level camera, you're getting really high resolution. Now, you're also capturing all of the cracks and the dust and all of that. So we do the best we can to get, dust knocked off of things before we shoot. But, if there are defects actually in the photo or ingrained in the negative, we're catching those defects too. So we're getting it all. But we can fix that better in post-processing than we can, like once we've shot it, we can, fix those things pretty easily without ever even knowing that it was there. But then in fall of 2019, I sold all my scanners, and we had one that was like they call it a high-speed scanner, but where you auto feed photos through it. Mm-hmm. And it was attached to a flatbed, and that was okay, but you could never feed anything fragile through it. And as I'm sure you're coming across, if you've got 100-year-old pictures, you probably have some of the cabinet cards that are mm-hmm. stiff, right?
Yeah. So
we'd have to do those on flatbeds. And sometimes you have mirroring and a glare that shows up on those older photographs. that when the scanner scans it, it's throwing light up onto that basically mirror, and it's reflecting the light. So you lose a lot of detail, where with the camera scanning, we eliminate that. There's some amazing before and afters. Like I did some tests on using a scanner before I sold the scanners. I ran a couple of tests so I'd have samples to show people the difference between you know, what a camera can do and what the scanner can do. But it ends up being faster. It's better for the photos because, you know, a lot of the photos are fragile or bent and you can't feed them through an auto feeder scanner. So it's really just a better process for us.
Well, I just thought that was really fascinating how you're getting highest quality pictures by this new process.
Yeah, yeah. And honestly, it's not all that new of a process. You know, I think the Library of Congress uses it. You know, they're using the $45,000 cameras. I'm not quite using that camera. I'm using a pro camera, but you know, Library of Congress and National Archives, they do all copies. It's called copy stand work.
Oh, okay.
That's how they do their preservation. So it's not actually that new of a technique, but it's becoming a little bit newer in the world of which I live.
Okay. I just love I just love being able to preserve family history as legacy photos. Like I said, I think some of the oldest pictures I have are from right around 1900, and just having them, and then I guess you have to figure out, you know, who is actually in the picture, but
Yeah.
I have pictures where they're written directly on the photo, who's in the picture, and, you know, all kinds of things. But there's such treasures.
With an arrow.
Oh yeah, yeah, I do. I have one. It was my great grandfather, and it has an arrow and says "Pop," but I know which Pop it is because I have another picture of that great grandfather to know who it is.
Yeah.
But they're just such treasures, and I'm just so happy to share with everyone about how that you can bring all of those photos together into a story and into a beautiful book that you have.
Yeah, well, it's definitely something I'm passionate about and love doing, and it's what lights me up.
That's great.
It took me a really long time to figure out what lit me up, but this was it. Like this is probably the longest I've been with one thing that I feel good about. Like I've had my corporate jobs and was there for many years in several different positions, but this is what I love doing it. You know, they say, you know, what's the thing you would do for free? And this is it.
Yep, I completely understand.
But
well, right,
you know,
right.
If the money tree were growing out back, right? Like this is the thing that I would do for free.
Well, it's great that you can bring what you love and you're passionate about and serve others while you're doing it.
Yeah, yeah.
So, well, thank you, Rachel. I really appreciate your time and sharing your books, and obviously we're sharing your contact information and all of those good things. But I just really appreciate getting to meet you and listening to your stories.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. It's my pleasure. I love talking about photos, and I know you and I are going to have more conversations about family history.
Absolutely, no doubt. Take care.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.